Ryan Mcbeth is back with us. He's our intelligence analyst, software architect, and cybersecurity guy. You know, how has warfare evolved in the 21st century, particularly, let's say, in the realms of influence and propaganda?
Oh, yeah, that is a fantastic question. When we're talking about propaganda, what we've done is we've gone from those old propaganda posters, like you're talking about those like buy Liberty bonds, you know, or defeat the Hun, you know, with a baby on a bayonet and this German soldier looking mean, you know. We've gone from that to the kind of information warfare that convinces kids to go glue themselves to a Navy ship, which actually happened, the MV Cape Orlando, I believe in Long Beach, California. Iranian disinformation agents convinced these kids who were pro-Hamas supporters to glue themselves to the side of a ship because they thought weapons were going to be sent to Israel. Now, I don't think a lot of weapons going to Israel go out of the West Coast. It would come out of the East Coast, not the West Coast. But there's a reason why these kids are so weak-minded, right? They don't tend to think of those things. So what we've gone from is propaganda that's designed to influence to a kind of propaganda that can be used as an actual weapons system.
How do you define what you mean by this thing you call invisible battlefield and how they differ from traditional battlefields today, especially when you look at a place like how Israel is fighting Hezbollah?
So one of the ways that you would normally act on a traditional battlefield is using kinetics. You are using force to stop the bad guys from doing what they want to do. Now, this invisible battlefield, or infodom war, as it's normally called in the industry, this invisible battlefield is designed to actually create effects on target without actually firing any weapons. So let's say you are Hezbollah and you want to reduce the amount of artillery shells that Israel has. Well, you might be able to launch a raid into Israel and destroy the artillery shell factory. That's going to be really, really hard to do. But what you might be able to do is create propaganda showing Israelis shooting artillery in civilian areas. And then countries like the United States, who might supply artillery shell technology, go, ooh, you know what? We're not going to give Israel any more artillery shells. So if you do that, it has the same exact effect as if you blew up that place. The artillery shells stop.
What role do you think social media platforms play in modern warfare and these influence campaigns?
So there's quite a few roles. One of the first roles is that social media is actually great for developing intelligence. It is a way to perform what's called OSINT, or open source intelligence. There are some people who will take a selfie of themselves in front of a specific landmark, and people like me can figure out where they are, either from the metadata of the picture or by using AI or by using just pattern matching to go, oh, I know exactly where that person is, let's fire a rocket at them. So that's kind of one way social media can be used against the enemy. You know, another thing, social media has some advantages for people who are deployed. They can talk with their families. You know, that's something that couldn't really happen 40 years ago. You might get a phone call once in a while. You might be able to send, but you're more likely sending letters, right? That's more of a possibility. But today you have almost instant communication with your family. So soldiers who are deployed will be able to get that comfort by talking to their family. But social media can also be used as a weapon to turn people against their own governments. And we've seen that today with people who are saying, oh, we shouldn't support Ukraine because they're just sucking up money and they're doing this and they're doing that. When if all you're getting in that algorithmic feed is the propaganda from the other side, you're never going to receive information such as, you know, it's necessary to support Ukraine because China is watching how we behave in Ukraine, and the way we act in Ukraine is going to reflect whether China invades Taiwan.
You said something quite recently, that the war in Ukraine is about China.
Yeah.
Explain that to us.
Absolutely. So Ukraine is in Europe, and this particular country is connected via road and rail networks. It's very easy to get to. And right now, Ukraine has not asked for any help. They haven't asked for any soldiers. They haven't asked for any boots on the ground. They just said, give us ammunition. That's all they've wanted is ammunition. And in some cases, we have failed to provide them the tools that they need to defend themselves against Russia. So China is watching how we behave, because it is logistically very simple to get weapons to Ukraine. Now, when it comes to something like Taiwan, China will invade Taiwan in either 2027 or maybe 2030 if deterrence fails. So now we have the tyranny of distance. The Pacific is a really big lake, and Taiwan is about 6,300 miles, 10,000 or so kilometers away from pretty much everything. So if we can't agree on getting weapon systems to Ukraine when it's literally one rail stop away from Europe, how are we going to agree to defend Taiwan when it's 6,300 miles away from everything? And China is watching how we behave.
You know, you spent 20 years as an infantryman in the United States Army. Why make the transition to this disinformation and misinformation and now an engineer, software engineer?
So, you know, I back when I was a kid, my dad wanted me to be a carpenter. And I didn't want to be a carpenter. I wanted to get into computers. And, you know, you can't get money from your father, get it from your Uncle Sam. And
that's a good
you know, when I joined just to get a degree in computer science, and I was good at it, and I liked it, and I stayed. And the reason I got into the whole disinformation thing was that at the time when I got out of the military, I was working for Accenture, doing what's called C4ISR, Command Control Communications, Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance. Basically, I found bad guys. And I would give that information to my client, who would then or maybe continue surveillance. And, you know, I started a YouTube channel talking about software programming and a little bit of intel. And when the war in Ukraine kicked off, my channel got very, very popular. And I got into the disinformation side of things because it's almost like Forrest Gump, how Forrest Gump got good at running. Because Forrest Gump got good at running because everyone was always chasing him, right? So I got good at detecting disinformation because I was constantly seeing disinformation on the internet about weapon systems, and something I know a little bit about, or intelligence. People would say, hey, this tank did this thing, and I would say, no, that tank can't do that thing, and I know this because of this. And so as I explored that, I started realizing how our adversaries actually have these networks set up to pump out disinformation to use as a weapon system.
You know, how can propaganda be weaponized to sway public opinion or even to stabilize nations?
Yeah. So you can use propaganda or disinformation mainly to convince your population that the government is not on their side. And once a population loses faith in their government, they're going to either become apathetic, or they're going to not support a war, or they're going to vote politicians in who are more favorable to the adversary. So that's how it's used.
But so how is it that these non-state actors use disinformation to achieve their strategic goals?
Well, they do it in a certain way by creating an actual goal. And some of these goals might be very specific. Like, for example, like they don't want the U.S. to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. So they'll do something like set up a campaign where they say cluster bombs are illegal, cluster bombs are horrific, cluster bombs are horrible weapons that have been banned by the Geneva Convention. And they're lying there, but it doesn't matter. They're actually trying to reach a certain specific goal. They'll initiate this campaign, usually using embedded assets, journalists who are in favor of the adversary, and their goal is to pump out enough information that eventually somebody in media who has a lot of followers would actually retweet that specific Russian propaganda. So that's their basic goal. I call it the magic disinformation kill chain.
You know, before our CIA operative joined us, do you feel that Europe is threatened by a nuclear attack from Russia?
I don't. And one of the reasons is that there are only 5 reasons to use a nuclear weapon. The first would be to create a breakthrough. So if there was a defensive position, you would use a nuclear weapon over top of that defensive position. There wouldn't be a lot of radioactive fallout from that, and you would actually run troops directly under where that nuclear weapon exploded, and you would get into their rear. So that's number one. Russia has not done that in Ukraine yet, mainly because they don't have the troops to actually exploit that breakthrough. The second reason to use a nuclear weapon would be to stop an advance. So for example, Kursk. Right now, Ukraine has invaded the Russian oblast of Kursk. And Russia did not use a nuclear weapon to stop Ukraine from actually invading. So that's kind of a hint right there. So that's the second reason you'd use a nuclear weapon, and that's to stop an invasion. The third reason you would use a nuclear weapon is to destroy some kind of underground bunker command and control facility. We're thinking like NORAD or Taiwan's, I think it was called Hang Seng, their command center in Taiwan. Something that a conventional bomb can't quite reach. Ukraine really doesn't have any of those command centers. A fourth reason would be to take out something like a carrier strike group. Ukraine doesn't have a navy. And the fifth reason would be to stop a fording site where you're crossing a river, or to stop an amphibious invasion. And again, Ukraine doesn't have a navy, and they don't have the ability to actually invade something like Crimea via the sea. So those 5 use cases for using a nuclear weapon just aren't present in Europe.
Ryan Mcbeth is our guest. When we return, he'll stay with us, and we'll be joined by our CIA operative across the miles away. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back. We're now joined by our retired senior service case officer from the CIA across the miles away. John, let's start with what is going on in Israel. Has the IDF decided that it's going to conquer? And I know conquer is a very strong, old, ancient word. They're going to escalate until Hezbollah just realize they have no options but to concede defeat. Or will Hezbollah become like a wounded dog, feeling they have nothing else to lose and will fight until the very end?
That's a great question, because it is a festering issue out there, has been for a long, long time. But the Israelis have changed the paradigm for all of unconventional war with the most recent events, with what they're accused of doing with the pager systems and the walkie-talkies. The ability to touch their sponsors in Iran, the leadership of Hezbollah and their operational platforms that are in southern Lebanon has changed the entire consideration for how war is waged in the region. There is a conventional component that could certainly be exercised by Israel, but whether they make that move or not is unclear. They're attriting the enemy now daily. And one thing you can say with some certainty is that the Israelis are not going to give up the northern part of Israel and have 70,000 displaced people that they essentially are forced to redraw their map. The current situation is not sustainable, and it will be broken in some fashion, whatever they see fit. But the options that they have are wide open to them. The Israelis are in a very good position coming at this problem.
Ryan, you're shaking your head.
Yeah. Oh, I think he's absolutely correct. I mean, Israel did this incredible shaping operation with using the pager attack and the walkie-talkie attack. And a shaping operation is designed to set up conditions on the battlefield for future success. And right now, what they have is Hezbollah on the back foot. And so now Israel can attack at a time and place that they're choosing and be decisive.
So, John, how is Iran and Russia and China, especially Iran, sitting back, looking at this and thinking about their next move? Are they already involved?
Iran is directly involved in whether they wanted their hand exposed or not. That question's been answered now. When you have some of your own senior officials or people that are in cabinet jobs blown up in the pager activities, the first question that was asked in the Middle East is, why does a serving ministerial level person have an internal communications device to Hezbollah leadership? And that's a question that doesn't get asked in the Western media, but it's certainly been asked in the Middle East. And the Arab states are behind the Israelis. They're sick of this. They're sick of the commotion and the constant conflict of all of this issues with the Palestinians. There is war fatigue across the region, and everyone is tired of it in every country. And the Iranian mullahs they've played their hand as far as they can and not been able to draw the U.S. or Israel into the war that they want to fight. That's the paradigm change that is occurring now. The Iranians have been unsuccessful in drawing in other powers to fight them in a way that they want to fight. They've made the same mistake that the United States has made. The enemy gets a vote, and they decide how they want to fight you. Not you. You don't have to respond to the way that they trigger your activities to respond to them against their strengths. The Israelis have picked apart their system, and the Iranians have a tremendous difficulty internally in their country now. It's a time clock issue. The demographic time bomb has gone off, and you've got 57% of the population under the age of 35 that is they can't get married, they can't move out of their parents' house, they can't get a job, they can't travel. Many don't have a passport and can't get one, and if they have a passport, they can't get a visa to go anywhere. And they're paralyzed in a state of war and conflict, and they're a global pariah to a people with an 8,000-year history. It's just not possible to sustain this, and the mullahs are aging out. When you look at 57% of the population, it doesn't have any memory of the revolution in 1979. It's just this historical thing that happened that drove them off the cliff. And the Iranian population is in conflict with their government now. It's in varying degrees of intensity, but it can be triggered and set off again when they have an issue that confronts people where there's another atrocity or overreach from the government. So the Israelis are in the catbird seat now, and they are responding in a way that the Iranians are not prepared to defend themselves. It's a new type of warfare. It's a paradigm change now that has changed the way unconventional war is waged.
Ryan, why such silence from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan? Is that an indication that they too don't want them in their country? Because when they had them, it was very disruptive, it was very chaotic. You look at what's going on over Europe, these European countries are pushing back from the Netherlands. They don't want these migrants in their country. Nobody wants them. And so is it quietly being said, without being said, that Israel is finally getting rid of this dark problem?
That's almost certainly the case. When you take a look at Egypt, they are suffering right now economically because of the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Most of Egypt's economy revolves around the Gulf of, most of Egypt's economy revolves around the Suez Canal. And right now, Egypt isn't getting any money for traffic in the Suez Canal because the Houthis keep blowing up ships in the Gulf of Aden. So Egypt wants this problem solved immediately. It would be great if the Palestinians would just go away. And the other issue is Saudi Arabia views Iran as a massive threat. You have this massive Shia population that's right across the lake from Saudi Arabia who is vying for influence. And Saudi Arabia has fought Iran indirectly, again, fighting rebels in Yemen. So both Saudi Arabia and Egypt both see the Palestinians as a threat, and Jordan, of course, sees the Palestinians as a threat because the Palestinians tried to rebel when Jordan took them in. So the Palestinians are pretty much fresh out of friends, and the only exception is Iran, and Iran really is only using the Palestinians to serve their own interests.
You know, Mr. Operative, could Israel miscalculate while it seems everything is in their favor now? Are there minefields that they should be very careful of?
Absolutely.
Well, a ground incursion carries enormous risk into southern Lebanon, and that's what Iran is hoping that they'll do. But the Israelis have demonstrated they have other options to use, and their time is on their side with some of this stuff, and the clock is working against the Iranians. And I am confident that the Israelis have a whole series of new and creative ways of dealing with this. And the first wave with the walkie-talkies and pagers is just one of a sequence. They don't do one-off things and then sit back and wait to see what happens. They have a plan. They have an operational plan that has steps and is carefully scripted out over time. And they're using their skill set that is unique in the region. And they are fine with their relationships with other countries, and nobody wants to deal with the Palestinian issue anymore. The optics of the leadership from Hamas living in a 5-star hotel in Qatar is something that is not lost on anybody in the region. These guys are living in luxury, and now they're under the gun, and the Qataris have told them to leave. Wow. So they are homeless now. Where are they going to go? No one wants them, and the countries that they've asked have said unequivocally, no, you can't come here. So they're stuck, and the time clock is running. It won't take long to see how this plays out.
How about the hostages, Ryan? Is that just a foregone conclusion that they're just lost forever?
There's always hope. But for every day this goes on, what we're going to see is the chances of hostages coming home fall to a point where it's going to be a year soon. And you're trying to keep a hostage alive over a year while they're being chased by Israeli bombs and Israeli special forces. That might be a little difficult. I think at some point Israel might actually have to call it and say that these hostages are probably no longer alive. I believe the last time there was a possible hostage deal, Hamas wasn't able to find very many hostages. And the other thing to be afraid of is right now, if there are any hostages left alive, they are probably being fought over, because Hamas isn't the only organization in Gaza. You also have Islamic Jihad. There's also other smaller organizations, and you have criminal gangs. And so now everybody's going to want a chair for when the music stops, because the music is going to stop. So now I would not be surprised if pretty soon you start to see different factions inside of the Gaza Strip fighting over hostages, because they need to capture their own hostages so they have a bargaining chip when the music stops and there aren't any chairs left.
Wow, there's a lot to pack here of what's going on in the Middle East. We're going to come back with Ryan and Mr. Operative here on the Armstrong Williams Show. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Mr. Operative, given all we're discussing, what are some of the other areas of our foreign policy should cause us grave concern? And what is the state of America's foreign policy from where you sit?
That's a good question, Armstrong. And when you look across the world right now, I have the same question that many of our foreign allies have, is where are the Americans on this issue? People don't know what we're planning, what our ideas might be. We're pushing a ceasefire. I mean, that is something that is occurring right now, but to what end? A ceasefire to end what? I mean, the whole war is evolving in another direction, and we're still calling for some kind of an agreement on ceasefire for the violence in Gaza. It's just we're behind the information curve, and we're behind the reality on the ground. The war is an evolutionary process that is moving very quickly now, and we're stuck in a space that has been overtaken by events. And we don't seem to be engaged at a level and an intensity to solve anything. And this is always a problem with an election year. That happens every time we have an election. But this time it seems more successfully exploited by hostile powers because they understand we're paralyzed.
What is the state of our intelligence gathering and the impact it has on the operations and the modern conflicts that we're especially seeing now in real time?
I think we have debilitated ourselves for the effectiveness of the intelligence gathering apparatus that we have. When you look around the world in some of the most difficult locations that give us the most difficulties, we don't have a presence in any of them. We don't have a presence in Iran and haven't since 1979. We don't have a presence in conflict areas. Iraq has a presence, but they don't leave the compound. And everywhere in Syria, we closed up shop and left. We really don't know what's going on there. And you have these little outposts that we have in different locations that are military based, but the FOB is like a Fort Apache designed activity that sits in the middle of a hostile area, and their first mission is to protect the base and the people that are on the base. That's not a conducive thing to gather information. And there's so much leaking of information, classified information in the U.S., that people are afraid to work with us, fear that they'll be exposed and killed in their own country. We have a very, very messy structural problem in the United States that our enemies understand completely and are exploiting. And we are not dealing with it, as far as I can see. I mean, I'm looking at it from the outside bleachers, but I spend a tremendous amount of time outside the country, and I haven't stumbled onto an intelligence officer in years in some of these places where there's plenty of Westerners that work there and move around. We're stuck, and we're blind in many areas.
Ryan, your comment?
So we have multiple ways of gathering intelligence. Human intelligence is an excellent thing. That's not my focus of work. My focus of work tends to be cyber intelligence, using computers to gather information, although you always do need that human component to add flavor. One of the things I've always said is that you can lie to me all you want, but if I look at your browser history, I know exactly what you're thinking, right? So we do have intelligence capabilities that use the cyber domain to gather information. And I think that particular capability is only growing. For example, years ago, if you wanted to follow somebody, you would actually have to follow that person, or maybe later you put a GPS tracker on their car or on their person. Nowadays, as long as we have access to camera systems, we can do facial recognition. I can track somebody through an entire city just using facial recognition from closed-circuit TV cameras if I have access to those cameras. So I actually think in some ways we are better off when it comes to intelligence collection, just because everybody lives their lives online. It's impossible to avoid cameras these days, and a lot of people put up information like their location when they go on to social media and gather information. And heck, when I walk into the store to buy pasta sauce, the Wi-Fi routers are actually looking at my phone, and they can determine exactly where I'm standing in the store, and that's how I get a coupon for pasta sauce at the register.
Wow. You know, Mr. Operative, can you describe just how covert actions plays a role in the modern art of influence and propaganda today?
We have state actors now, Armstrong, that are actively working against the U.S. private sector as well as the U.S. government around the world and in these conflict areas especially. And not to agree with your other guests, but the fact is that a lot of people in the world know how we collect information. They don't know how good we are at it, but they understand the avoidance capability. And in a major city, you're absolutely right. There's tremendous coverage and cameras and everything else. There's not a lot of cameras in places that we really need information from. And there's not a lot of technical capacity when people have moved off of the technical system. And there's also the problem that many recognize that we vacuum up everything, and they are successfully staying out from under that because plans and intentions are in people's heads. And unless you have a human spy, you're not going to get plans and intentions. And that's the issue that just was changed by Israel. They went into their what they thought was a secure way of communicating, a one-way system, and they fractured it and fully penetrated it and took a hard death toll when they decided to move. That is a disruptive paradigm change that cost them lives and primarily trust. That is the wave of this next war. This is how it's going to be waged. It's personal, and it's going to be up close and personal. It's not going to be 2,000-pound laser-guided munitions. It's going to be people doing things like this, where they penetrate a supply chain, they put something in it. And most people don't realize how complex that activity was to actually build something and get it into a pager. You don't have a lot of room to work with, but I've heard that as many as 2 ounces of HE was secreted inside of some of these devices. That's a lot of explosive, a high explosive, something that you have to manufacture at a state level. It's not like some data sheet that was put together by a Palestinian bomb maker years ago. This is sophisticated stuff. And that is the next phase of war. We are notorious, we as Americans, for fighting the war with the same plan we fought the last war. And that has been overtaken by events, which is why we left Afghanistan the way we did, and we lost our footing in Iraq, and Syria is holding on with the way that activity is underway.
You know,
the world is moving on, and it's left us behind in many respects.
You know, Ryan, a lot of people privately talk about the upcoming elections and how it could trigger chaos, civil war, Americans fighting each other. When you think about the influence of propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, what kind of impact could that have on our upcoming elections if we're not prepared?
One of the impacts it could have is you could do something like convince voters to go to the wrong polling place. If you don't have good information, you might have people who are getting their information from other sources, such as Twitter or Facebook. And it might be, hey, if you want to vote for President Biden, you actually have to go to this polling place, and then they go there and that polling place doesn't exist. That is certainly something that can happen immediately. There might also be disinformation campaigns that tell people that they need certain kinds of identification to vote when they actually don't need that, so people just don't show up at the ballot box to vote because they don't have that particular kind of identification. Basically anything that can actually disrupt the physical process of getting people to the polls or disrupt the physical process of mailing in a ballot, that can be gamed by the system, and there really are no control measures on that.
But let me follow up with you. What methods do agencies, what our government should use to counteract the disinformation campaigns of these adversarial nations, and also people within our own country?
So there's essentially two ways of doing this. When it comes to people in our own country, there is freedom of speech. And even a lie falls under freedom of speech. So it is very difficult to decide what is and is not disinformation when in the United States we have the First Amendment. Now, when it comes to foreign actors, one of the things I have done is I have traveled around America speaking to the military and speaking to various policymakers, where I have explained to them that disinformation is a weapon system. And one of the ways we can prevent this weapon system being used is we kinetically target these bad actors. So that means if you go into work every day at a disinformation factory, we destroy that factory. And we do that with a weapons system because you are using a weapon system against the United States. So that is one option. It is to use kinetic effects against these targets to physically dissuade people from actually working for these organizations. Another way is to disrupt their cyber capability. That could be a second way of actually disrupting these items or these actors. And a third way is to just get the correct information out there. Develop a trusted source of information so that people know where to go to actually get this correct information. And eventually, these disinformation actors will die on the vine if we don't kill them in real life.
You know, let me thank both of you, Ryan Mcbeth and our CIA operative, for sharing such vital information at home and abroad. And we just look forward to having you both back in the future. Mr. Keys, thank you. Mr. Mcbeth, looking forward to having you guys back. When we come back, Jonathan Jackson, member Congressman from the Chicago, Illinois, will be joining us to talk about Congress itself. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Welcome back to the broadcast. We're honored to have Congressman Jonathan L. Jackson from the 1st District of Illinois. Congressman Jackson, thank you so much for joining us.
Honored to be here. Great to see you, Brother Armstrong. Thank you for having me on.
It is my pleasure. You know, so many Americans ask, why do we keep going to that cliff where it is always this possibility of a government shutdown, and yet it doesn't happen? And the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, always find a way to get the support of the Democrats to make sure that the government continues without any interruption. Your thoughts?
Well, there's a huge fracture within the Republican Party. And I take my hats off to Leader Hakeem Jeffrey. The Democrats at this point, and it's an anomaly in history, are leading from behind. We're the minority party that's having to show the leadership to keep the government open and funded. Mr. Johnson cannot get or corral his 219 party members to pass a budget. So these budgets that have kept the government open, that have averted the government cliff, as in the United States not being able to pay its soldiers, its military, its budget, is being kept open by the Democrats, and that's to the outstanding leadership of Leader Hakeem Jeffries. And so, on any given day, the Republicans are fighting in-house. Think about it. In Ohio, the Republican governor and the Republican mayor is saying there's nothing disparaging and nothing wrong with what's happening with the Haitians, and what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are doing with the Haitian population in Springfield are lies. There's nobody eating cats and dogs, and these people are good Americans and exemplary people that are trying to make life better for themselves and be contributing to society. And so, why would the president and the vice president say that against the governor and the mayor, both Republicans in the same state? Same thing's happening in Washington, D.C.
What do you say? What do you say to Speaker Mike Johnson and others? And obviously, this has already passed. Who says that they're concerned that migrants are who are illegal and not U.S. citizens are on the voting rolls to vote in this presidential election, and that should not be the case. That only U.S. citizens should be allowed to vote. What do you say to that?
Well, it's beneath the dignity of the institution. There's no truth to it. There's no verification to it. This is rehashing 2020. It went through all the courts. There's no proof. Show the proof. And it's just not there. There were 537 elections in 2020. There were 435 people in Congress. There was roughly 470 elections. There were 33 Senate races up, 435 congressional, and the president and vice president. And he says only his numbers were off. No senator, no congressman, nobody else is complaining about anything, just his. Come on, that's like so ridiculous. It's been tested, vetted through the courts. It's not true.
So do you think?
So he's not proving anything. Okay. Show me where there's proof. But there is proof that he's not telling the truth.
All I do, Congressman, is just ask the questions. So you're saying the reason why America faces these cliffs and the reason why we have these issues in the country is because of a divided Republican Party. It is the Republicans alone who are responsible for the chaos that we see ourselves facing today?
Yes, sir. Because if you look at what is the role of the Congress to deal with the appropriations, to deal with the spending of the money, the leadership right now is in the hands of Speaker Mike Johnson. He's not able to pass a budget with the majority of the Republican Party.
Well, let me raise this with you. Obviously, you feel very strong about your Democratic Party and your minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries. If the Democrats are doing such a terrific job of holding the country together, why do you think that your nominee, Ms. Harris, is not just run away with this election by 25 percentage points? Or is it that the American people just don't understand the issue? Is it that the American people see flaws in both parties and they want both parties and the legislation to eventually work for them? If the Republicans are so bad, why is there such not only a close contested election, but it seems as though Republicans could possibly retain control of the Senate and the House is still up in the air? Why such close elections?
Well, let me tell you, I really don't try to hit the line on like super partisanship. I've got a lot of great Republican friends. I don't want to demonize them or disparage anyone just because they're Republican. I want to be very narrow in my conversation, if you will, Armstrong, on that. I got great respect for you and for quite a few Republicans. I'm talking about the leadership that's in place. And Mr. Donald J. Trump is an aberration. And so some people are just voting for him because they thought they were right the first time. Other people are blindly just voting with the mass of the party. But if you look at the character of the man, what's at the top of the ticket, that's a problem. And so there's a long, and it's going to be a deep fracture at the end of this election. And when you've got someone that's denying what's happened, 81 million people told the man they did not want him in the last election. That's verifiable. That's why he's not the president today. I can't explain the reason why the race is close, but if the press would do a better job of reporting the facts. He is a former ex and now a convicted person that's seeking the nomination. Even to call him president and call her vice president, he's a former president. But if anyone else had been convicted of the crime that he has committed, they'd be known by the crime they committed. It'd be called felon. But that handle is not attributed to him or applied.
How does the Vice President Harris earn the trust of the voters not only on the economic woes that they face, but also one of the areas where she's vulnerable is the issue of our open borders, which is why she recently paid a visit to the southern border in Arizona. How does she earn the trust of the voters on that issue and the economy?
Well, let's take the first part on the border issue. There was a border deal in place that the Republicans and the Democrats had agreed to, and the nominee, Mr. Donald Trump, started calling around and telling people, "Do not sign it." He wanted to make this an issue. So both sides, there's a lot of bipartisanship agreement on what we have to do with the border. Why would Donald Trump scuttle the deal and politicize it and say, "Let's keep this a hot button issue," and so that we can campaign against it? You know what he did. Everyone knows what he did, and that's not fair. The other part on what can we do about the economy, the tax cuts that Mr. Trump had put in place. 20 years ago, there was one person in America worth $100 billion. Now it's over 100 people worth $100 billion. Don't we believe that people that have made this enormous amount of wealth off the American people ought to pay something, pay their fair share? We have 42 million people, 21.6 million households that are food insecure, that need supplemental nutritional assistance program, the SNAP program. Why are we not fully funding SNAP? Right now, it's caught up, and I'm in the Ag Committee with $30 billion more of cuts that people are seeking on the Republican side. The Democrats are very much in unison on saying, let us feed. This goes to $2 per meal per person. We cannot have rising malnutrition. That is what we currently have. So there are sensible programs that many people want to get and move forward with. I want to see the Farm Bill passed. The farmers need it, the markets need it, our economy needs it. So some of this has just simply been a matter of politics that Mr. Trump has not been really held to task on what his economic achievements are. Many people in the press aren't holding him to task.
What do you say?
I just saw an ad this morning. He's trying to sell a gold watch.
What do you say?
$100,000 gold watch.
What do you say about the rise in juvenile crime, particularly where you are in Chicago? What do we do to curtail this crime, the petty theft, people living in fear, particularly in neighborhoods in your own backyard of Chicago? What recommendations do you have?
Yeah, Armstrong. So let's think about it. We have seen this before. This has played out where children have been at risk, where families have been fractured, and some of the social fabric is fraying. We have to bring children together and help them. You know the book, and we've all read it. This is Oliver Twist. You're talking about the children that did this in Europe before. These are some of the same children now that are coming from at-risk communities, be they black, white, or any other color. And when we look at Dylan Ruth, how did he get a gun? When we look at Mother Emanuel's church, why are we weaponizing children? We've seen the young man that went into Emmanuel Church. We've seen the child that went into the grocery store in Buffalo. We've seen Kyle Rittenhouse to go into the store and to walk the streets in Wisconsin. We've seen Aurora, Colorado. We've seen Sandy Hook. America's youth are being weaponized. And these school shootings, there have been over 50 to date, I believe, in America. It's an increasing trend. We have to turn our children away from a culture of violence. There are more mass shootings. Think about it. 70 years ago, people had to go to school, Armstrong, and to do a nuclear drill, go underneath the desk. I don't know what that was going to solve, but they had to go underneath the desk. When I was in school 40 years ago, we had to have fire drills, and that was very important. Now, today, one of my colleagues at the Congress, he got an urgent call, and his child was upset, and they said he wasn't cooperating. And he calls in and finds out they were having a gun drill, and they were telling his child that he would have to jump off of a second-story floor in the event of a gun drill. We're having gun drills in school. How much things have changed, and it's increasing. So we have to get violence out of the culture, out of the schools, out of the society. What's making our children more violent? And young white men have an extremely difficult time that I know they've been very generous in looking at young black children, but we have to talk about young white children of the Kyle Rittenhouses and the Sandy Hooks and the Zimmerman that killed Trayvon Martin. Let's help all these young children like we've seen in Oliver Twist and the children of Europe before.
How do we make sure, when you look at the dismal results, particularly with these urban kids and the writing, the reading, in arithmetic, what they're doing on these standardized tests. How do we make sure that education works for our kids? Because it's one of the most important passports to the future.
I agree, Armstrong. And I would say the school is not defined simply as the building. The school is the neighborhood. If we're going to talk about enhancing the reading scores, we have to look at the fabric of the society. What do the children need? There's one school of thought that says we have to prepare our children for school. There's another school of thought that says we have to prepare the school for the children. So I am all for a flexible model so we can meet children where they are. Some children are showing up to school with dirty clothes. Some schools will have to have a washer and dryer in there. Some schools, some children aren't coming from a functional home. Some children are living in the margins, sleeping on the aunts, nieces, nephews. I had one child, I asked him when I was a professor, and asked him for a phone number and how could I reach him. He gave me 5 different numbers, and I was like, well, how do I reach you? Well, this is my aunts, this is my cousins, this is my grandmothers. I mean, the child, what they've now is they've used a sanitized term as opposed to saying child homelessness. They're saying these children are highly mobile, meaning that they're coming and moving fluidly. We have to stabilize the neighborhoods. Housing has to be a priority. Food has to be a priority. And then to give them all the care and wrap the services around them, making sure they've had their dental exam, their vision exam. I believe government should step in and help children when they can't help themselves. And when families can help themselves, the government ought to step back. Right now, we're in a period where children and families need the government's assistance. Let's get the family strong so the government can get out of the family structure.
You know, finally, we have about 30 seconds left. How do we remind people that no matter what happens after November 5th, the winter, no matter, we're still Americans at the end of the day, and we face some of the greatest crises in our history, and we've been able to survive. How do we send that message, Congressman?
Well, it starts at the top. I'm very much concerned about the children in Springfield, Ohio. There have been bomb threats on these Haitian students and other students. It's a safe place. It's a model community. There are 32 states that have a Springfield, and Mr. Trump and Vance are racializing this, and they are now making Springfield a dangerous place. So we have to stop having physical violence, have to stop having political violence, talking it. These words matter. Words matter. It ended up getting our officers
Congressman
killed on the
Jackson,
Hill.
I can tell you and I must get together for a longer conversation and invite you to our studio house. There's so much for us to talk about, so much to cover. It was always a pleasure having you on, and thank you so much for joining us, as well as our other guests. Thank you. Good day from the Armstrong Williams Show.
All right, brother.